Inside Texas death row. The waiting place. There is a place in Texas where time doesn't move the way it does anywhere else. Out there, people measure life in hours, in plans, in things that are coming next. But inside this place, time is measured differently. In court dates. In appeal filings. In the sound of footsteps stopping at a cell that isn't yours, yet. And sometimes, in the silence that follows when someone disappears from the unit entirely. This is Texas death row. Not a single room. Not a single building. But a controlled world inside the Allan B. Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, where every man lives alone, and every man is waiting. Waiting for a decision that has already been made. Waiting for a system that rarely changes its mind. And the most unsettling part? No one here knows exactly when their time will run out. Some men arrive in their 20s and grow old in these cells. Others move through the system faster than expected. And every single one of them wakes up each day with the same reality. The state of Texas has already decided how their story ends. What happens between now and that moment is just time. And what that time does to a human being. That's where the real story begins. Arrival into isolation. The journey to death row doesn't begin here. It begins in a courtroom. With a verdict. And then a second decision, one that carries even more weight. Because in Texas, a death sentence is not just about what someone did. It's about what the system believes they might do in the future. The jury is asked a question that sounds simple, but carries enormous consequences. Will this person remain dangerous for the rest of their life? If the answer is yes, the sentence becomes death. And once that sentence is read, everything changes. The individual is no longer just an inmate. They become part of a separate system entirely. A system built for control, isolation, and finality. They are transported, often in chains, under heavy guard, to the Polunsky Unit. And the moment they arrive, they are processed into administrative segregation. But this is not temporary. There is no transition period. No adjustment phase. This is permanent isolation. From the very first day. They are searched. Photographed. Assigned a number. And then, they are placed inside a cell that will become their entire world. The door closes. The lock engages. And from that moment on, everything they experience will happen within a space no larger than a small bathroom. There is no introduction. No explanation of how to survive this environment. Because survival here isn't taught. It's learned, slowly, and often painfully. And for some, it never fully happens at all. The cell. The cell is simple. Deliberately so. Concrete walls on all sides. A solid steel door at the front. No bars. No clear view outside. Just a narrow slot, used for passing food trays, restraints, and sometimes, written communication. Inside, there is a concrete slab that serves as a bed. A thin mattress. A combined sink and toilet made of stainless steel. And a small shelf or desk, depending on the unit. That's it. No decoration, unless the inmate creates it. No movement, beyond a few steps in either direction. No privacy, and yet complete isolation. Because while the door blocks physical contact, it doesn't block sound. Voices travel. Sometimes clearly. Sometimes distorted through layers of concrete and steel. Men call out to each other across the tier. They hold conversations. They argue. They joke. They share news. And sometimes, they just make noise to remind themselves they're not alone. But there are moments, long moments, when the entire section falls quiet. And in those moments, the silence becomes overwhelming. Because when there's nothing to hear, nothing to see, nothing to do, your thoughts get louder. And on death row, those thoughts have nowhere to go. The daily routine. Every day follows a pattern. Not because it's designed for structure, but because it's designed for control. Meals are delivered through the slot in the door. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Each one passed in silently, with minimal interaction. The inmate takes the tray, eats alone, returns it the same way. There are no communal dining areas. No shared conversations over food. No sense of normal routine. Just repetition. Over and over again. Showers are scheduled. Individually. An inmate is handcuffed through the slot. The door opens. They are escorted, under supervision, to a shower area. Then returned to the cell. Recreation, if granted, happens in isolation too. A small, enclosed space. Often described as a cage. Surrounded by fencing. Open to the sky, but still confined. No one else is there. No interaction. No real movement beyond pacing. And then, back to the cell. This routine repeats every single day. With very few changes. No work assignments. No educational programs. No group activities. Because in Texas death row, interaction is not part of the system. Isolation is. And over time, that isolation begins to reshape everything. The psychological effect. What happens to a person when they live like this for years? Not days. Not weeks. Years. In some cases, decades. The human brain is not built for prolonged isolation. It depends on interaction, on variation, on stimulation. And when those things are removed, the effects can be profound. Some inmates develop strict routines just to hold on to a sense of control. They wake at the same time, exercise in the same limited space, read whatever materials they can access, write letters, study legal documents, anything to create structure where none exists. Others struggle. Sleep patterns change. Time becomes difficult to track. Days blur together. Memory becomes unreliable. And in the absence of external input, the mind begins to turn inward. Sometimes in ways that are difficult to manage. There have been documented cases, reported by legal advocates and researchers, of inmates experiencing anxiety, depression, and other psychological effects linked to long-term solitary confinement. But not every experience is the same. Some adapt. Some endure. Some don't. And that raises a difficult question: if the punishment is death, what is the purpose of everything that happens before it? Life between executions. On Texas death row, time isn't just personal. It's shared. Because when one inmate receives an execution date, everyone knows. The information spreads quickly. Through shouted conversations. Through rumors. Through official announcements. And the atmosphere changes. There's tension. Not always visible, but always present. Because each execution is a reminder. A reminder that the system is active. That the process is real. That this place is not just about waiting. It's about ending. Some inmates follow these events closely. Tracking dates. Reading legal updates. Trying to understand how and why certain appeals succeed, or fail. Others avoid it completely. Choosing not to engage with something that feels too close. Too immediate. But even if you try to ignore it, you can't fully escape it. Because at some point, a cell goes quiet. And everyone understands why. The final days. When an execution date is confirmed, the timeline becomes precise. The inmate is transferred from Polunsky to the Huntsville Unit. Usually within days of the scheduled execution. The move is controlled. Quiet. Final. Inside Huntsville, the environment shifts. This is no longer a place of long-term confinement. It is a place of procedure. The inmate is placed in a holding area near the execution chamber. Monitored closely. Every movement documented. Every hour accounted for. There are opportunities for final visits. Final conversations. Final reflections. Some inmates speak openly. Others withdraw. And as the final day approaches, the outside world continues as normal. But inside, everything narrows down to a single moment. The execution process. Texas uses lethal injection. A single drug protocol. Typically pentobarbital. The inmate is escorted into the chamber. Strapped to a gurney. Medical lines are prepared. Witnesses are present. Officials follow a strict procedure. There is no improvisation. No deviation. Once the process begins, it continues to its conclusion. The official time is recorded. The sentence is carried out. And then, it's over. But what happens next is something most people never see. Aftermath and questions. Each execution becomes part of a larger conversation. About justice. About fairness. About the system itself. Texas has carried out more executions than any other state in the U.S. And that has drawn both support and criticism. Some see it as necessary. A response to the most serious crimes. Others question the process, pointing to cases where convictions were later challenged, or where new evidence raised doubts. Because the finality of execution leaves no room for correction. And that reality continues to shape the debate. But inside the prison, those debates feel distant. Because for the men still there, the system isn't theoretical. It's immediate. The endless wait. Back at Polunsky, nothing changes. Cells remain locked. Routines continue. New inmates arrive. Others leave. And the cycle repeats. Again and again. For those still inside, the question is not just when their time will come. It's how they will live until it does. How they will think. How they will endure. How they will exist in a space where time stretches, but never moves forward. Because in Texas death row, the sentence isn't just death. It's the waiting. And sometimes, the waiting is the part that changes everything. The unwritten rules of survival. There are no official instructions for surviving Texas death row. No handbook is given to explain how to endure years, sometimes decades, inside a concrete box. But over time, patterns emerge. Unwritten rules. Quiet understandings passed from one voice to another, through walls, through doors, through the narrow spaces where human connection still exists. One of the first things an inmate learns is how to communicate without being seen. Voices become tools. A conversation might stretch across multiple cells, carried through echoes and timing. Men learn when guards are nearby, when it's safe to speak, when silence is better. Because even something as simple as talking too loudly at the wrong time can bring consequences. And consequences here don't look like they do in general population. There are no fights to break up. No crowds to control. Discipline is immediate, and often isolating in a different way. Privileges can be taken. Recreation time reduced. Access to small comforts restricted. And in a place where there are so few comforts to begin with, losing even one can feel significant. So inmates adjust. They learn to manage relationships without proximity. To maintain respect without physical presence. To avoid conflict with people they may never even see. And perhaps most importantly, they learn how to manage themselves. Because on death row, there is no distraction from who you are. No way to walk away from your own thoughts. No way to escape your own mind. And over time, that becomes the real test. Time without meaning. Time behaves differently here. At first, it moves slowly. Painfully slowly. Minutes feel stretched. Hours feel endless. Every sound becomes something to focus on. Every movement becomes something to notice. But as days turn into months, and months into years, something changes. The edges of time begin to blur. Without variety, without movement, without new experiences, there are fewer markers to separate one day from the next. And when that happens, memory begins to shift. It becomes harder to recall when something happened. Was it last week? Last month? Last year? Even the concept of waiting begins to lose its structure. Because waiting usually implies something is coming. Something predictable. But here, the timeline is uncertain. Appeals can take years. Sometimes decades. Some inmates outlive their own expectations. Others move through the process faster than anyone anticipated. And that uncertainty creates a different kind of pressure. Not the kind that builds to a single moment. But the kind that stays constant. Always present. Always unresolved. So how do you measure a life in a place like this? By the number of appeals filed? By the number of executions witnessed from a distance? Or by something else entirely? Something harder to define? Connection to the outside world. Despite the isolation, death row is not completely cut off from the outside world. There are letters. Phone calls. Visits, though always behind glass. No physical contact. No handshakes. No embraces. Just a barrier. And a limited amount of time. For some inmates, these connections become essential. A way to maintain identity. To stay grounded in something beyond the walls. They write regularly. To family. To friends. Sometimes to people they've never met, pen pals who reached out after hearing about their case. These exchanges can last for years. Building a kind of relationship that exists entirely through words. But not every inmate has that support. Some lose contact over time. Families move on. Relationships fade. And eventually, the phone stops ringing. The letters stop coming. And the outside world becomes something distant. Almost abstract. A memory rather than a reality. And when that happens, the isolation deepens. Because it's no longer just physical. It becomes emotional. Legal battles that never end. Life on death row is not just about waiting. It's about fighting. Legally. Constantly. Every inmate enters an appeals process after sentencing. This is automatic. And it is often complex. Cases move through multiple levels of review. State courts. Federal courts. Sometimes the highest court in the country. Each step examines different aspects of the case. Was the trial conducted properly? Was the evidence handled correctly? Was the legal representation adequate? Were there constitutional violations? These questions are not simple. And the answers are rarely quick. Some appeals are denied. Others move forward. Occasionally, new evidence emerges. Witnesses change their statements. Forensic methods are re-evaluated. And in rare cases, convictions are overturned. But those cases are the exception. Not the rule. For most inmates, the process becomes a cycle. File. Wait. Receive a decision. File again. And with each passing year, the number of available options becomes smaller. Until eventually, there may be none left. And that's when the waiting takes on a different meaning. Because now, there is no longer anything standing between the present moment and the final outcome. Faith, routine, and control. In a place where control is limited, people look for ways to create it. Some find it in routine. Waking at the same time every day. Exercising in the confined space. Reading whatever books they can access. Studying. Writing. repeating the same actions until they form a structure. Others turn to faith. Religious practices become part of daily life. Prayer, scripture, reflection, not as an escape, but as a way to make sense of what cannot be changed. Chaplains visit. Conversations happen. Quiet moments are shared. And for some inmates, this becomes a central part of how they endure. But not everyone finds comfort in routine or belief. Some struggle to establish any structure at all. And without structure, time becomes harder to manage. Thoughts become harder to control. And the environment becomes harder to endure. So the question becomes, is survival here about physical endurance? Or something deeper? Something less visible, but far more difficult to maintain? When a date is set, there is a moment on death row that changes everything. It doesn't happen suddenly. But when it arrives, it is unmistakable. An execution date is set. For years, the future may have felt uncertain, distant, abstract. But now, it becomes specific. A day, a time, a deadline that cannot be ignored. The news spreads quickly, and the atmosphere shifts. Conversations change. Some inmates reach out, offering words of support through the walls. Others withdraw, choosing distance over involvement. Because this moment is deeply personal. And yet, it affects everyone. Because each scheduled execution is a reminder. A reminder that the system is moving forward. That the process does not stop. And that eventually, every name on death row may face the same moment. The last conversations. In the final days, communication takes on a different weight. Visits are arranged. Calls are made. Words are chosen carefully. Because there may not be another chance to say them. Families travel long distances. Sit across from glass. Speak through a phone. Trying to compress years of emotion into limited time. Some conversations are calm. Others are difficult. Some are filled with silence. Because not everything can be said. And not everything can be resolved. At the same time, inmates may speak with spiritual advisors. Or choose to spend time alone. Reflecting. Thinking. Preparing in ways that are difficult to fully understand from the outside. Because what do you say when there is nothing left to plan? What do you think about when the future has already been decided? The final hours. In the final hours, everything becomes structured, precise, measured. The timeline is followed carefully. There is no uncertainty now. Only procedure. The inmate is escorted, monitored, prepared, each step documented, each moment accounted for. And as the final time approaches, there is a stillness, a quiet that is different from the rest of the prison. Because this is no longer about waiting. This is about completion. And once it begins, there is no interruption. What remains? After an execution, the system continues. The cell is cleaned, prepared, eventually reassigned. Because the process does not end with one individual. It continues. Always. And for those still inside, life returns to its routine. Meals, showers, silence, conversation through walls, waiting. But something lingers. An awareness. A reminder of what lies ahead. And for some, a question that never fully goes away: how much time is left? The question that has no easy answer. Texas death row is often described in terms of punishment, of justice, of law. But inside, it becomes something more complex. It becomes a place where time stretches, where isolation shapes the human mind, where decisions made in a courtroom echo for decades, and where the end is always known, but never fully understood until it arrives. So the question remains, what does it mean to live in a place designed for death? And what does that experience reveal? Not just about those inside, but about the system itself? Because long after the doors close, long after the lights go out, the waiting continues. And in Texas death row, the waiting is the story. Some stories end with answers. This one doesn't. Because inside Texas death row, the question isn't just about justice or punishment. It's about time, isolation, and what happens to a person when both are taken to their limits. And maybe the hardest part to understand isn't the final moment. It's everything that comes before it. The waiting. The silence. The years that pass, behind a single locked door. And somewhere, right now, that wait is still going on.